Hello. Thank you for joining us here at the Global Business Travel Association. Today, we are going to have a webinar with TSA to discuss the Real ID enforcement. Now, GBTA's advocacy mission is to educate policymakers on the importance of business and managed travel. Our goal is to help shape policy that is helpful for the industry. Our other mission is to educate our members, you, on the laws and regulations that are coming down the pike. To that end, GBTA has been discussing Real ID with members for so long, it was the National Business Travel Association when we started the conversation. Real ID enforcement is here. Joining me today is George Peterson, Senior Program Manager, Real ID Program of TSA. George Peterson serves as Senior Program Manager, Real ID Program, in the Office of Enrollment Services and Vetting Programs as the Transportation Security Administration. He has served in a number of program and leadership roles in security and personal vetting, both at TSA and across DHS, and is certified Level 3 Program Manager. He is currently leading efforts to implement the use of mobile driver's license under Real ID across government and preparing TSA and federal agencies for Real ID card-based enforcement beginning May 7th, 2025. His duties require collaborating with senior decision makers of agencies with competing priorities and constrained budget and often politicized environments to build consensus, explore alternatives, and gain senior agency leadership approval. After graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy, George served as a naval aviator and warfare officer at stations around the world. He has an MBA in strategy and finance from the University of Chicago and worked in positions at U.S. Airways, Merrill Lynch, Deloitte Consulting before reserving service to his country and the federal government. We encourage you all, as we go through this, we encourage you all to place your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom right corner of the webinar. We will address these questions and move forward. George, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is George Peterson. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm actually here in proxy for Simone, who unfortunately couldn't make it. She sends her regrets and regards. Hopefully, I think everybody knows about TSA, but we'll do it really quick. It was created in the aftermath of 9/11 to oversee security modes for all modes of transportation. So we include, commercial general aviation, mass transit systems, freight passenger rail, highways, pipelines, ports, anything to do with the sort of the transportation infrastructure within the United States. At airports, we have things called, these individuals called transportation security officers. They wear the blue shirts. They interact daily with over 2 million passengers a day through over 440 airports to ensure the security. Next slide. And moving on, I'm here to talk to you today about the Real ID Act. It was passed in 2005. Now, Congress passed the act in 2005 based upon the 9/11 Commission to ensure that, to help ensure the security of our citizens and our infrastructure from terrorist or other attack. And its purpose is to define minimum security requirements for state-issued driver's license and ID cards. And these minimum security standards are only applicable in certain official use cases, such as boarding federally regulated commercial aircraft, accessing certain federal and military facilities, and entering nuclear power plants. So Real ID has been around since 2005. Implementing regulations was published in 2008. And there have been sort of phases to this in which the states had to accomplish certification first to issue Real IDs. Then certain facilities, including DoD military bases, implemented enforcement. And card-based enforcement is the last sort of phase of implementing the Real ID. That starts on May 7th, 2025, this Wednesday. And that's for official use cases, individuals that present a state-issued driver's license or ID card. It must be Real ID compliant. Otherwise, it's not considered an acceptable ID. TSA does accept many other acceptable IDs, including passports, tribal IDs, DoD cards, everything like that. And they're listed at that website below. And next slide, please, Ms. Dana. Okay, so everybody was like, well, where are we with Real ID? Well, Real ID covers 56 different licensing jurisdictions. Remember, the program issues requirements. It's the states that actually implement the requirements and the processes of issuing in the driver's license issuance process. It's their data, their licenses, they are sovereign entities. We simply have certain minimum security processes which would improve the overall security of the identity credential that's being presented for the individual that applies. We've had very extensive engagement with the states, with industry, almost everybody at Congress. We've been working very, very hard to get the word out on Real ID, to improve compliance rates, to understand the challenges that the states may have, and to assist them in any way possible. So nationally, if you looked at if the total sum total of Real IDs out there as a percentage of all state issued driver's license and ID cards, we have about 61% of them, of the 288 million issued licenses. So that's one data point that we use, but we use another data point which we think is a little bit more important, which is we collect data at the TSA checkpoint because we know for sure that individuals that intend to travel generally have a higher awareness of what Real ID is and that they need a Real ID to travel. And what we're seeing at the TSA checkpoint is that of all the state issued driver's licenses that are presented today, 78% of them were Real ID compliant. And if you consider all of the driver's license and ID cards, or all of the acceptable IDs that are seen at the checkpoint, I think the latest is we're over 83%. This is 81%, but right now, over the last few days, it's run about 83%. So that's pretty good news. It reflects the intention. Next slide, please. So now, so what is TSA going to do? We're one of the federal agencies that's required to implement enforcement, right? So we're going to begin on May 7th to enforce it, which means that airline passengers 18 years and older, those are the ones that are required to present ID. If a traveler presents a state issued driver's license or ID card, it must be Real ID compliant, but they could present any other acceptable ID such as a passport at TSA security checkpoints. Now, if someone presents a state issued ID that is not Real ID compliant, they're going to receive a non-compliance notification slip. It's going to be given to each passenger who has a Real ID. They may be directed to a separate area. They may receive additional screening, but TSA is going to enforce Real ID in a manner that minimizes the impact to overall operations, especially for those passengers who are prepared with their Real ID passport or other form of acceptable ID. Next slide. As I said, we did a lot of engagement just with TSA. We began distributing flyers at TSA checkpoints over a year ago, in which we said, Real ID is coming, get your Real ID. This is how you get a Real ID, a little nice QR code to the website, and you click on your state and learn everything that you need to know about getting a Real ID. We had a national advertising campaign launched in July 15th. It concludes on May 7th. We would like it to conclude. We're pending funding. And as soon as we get the funding, we'll resume the National Be Your Real ID self-advertising campaign. We've consistently collaborated with aviation and travel industry associations to promote Real ID through your marketing channels. And I mean, a lot of people through GBTA have done this, and nothing but thank you for assisting, leveraging you as a force multiplier to go through your communication channels and inform your customers about Real ID that's coming up. We held a virtual industry day on April 15th. I'm pretty sure GBTA attended that. We had over 350 plus attendees. We also closely collaborate with state DMVs to identify media and marketing opportunities. We've done things with a variety of states, Illinois especially, well, also Pennsylvania, Maine. We've done things where they have opportunities at the airport. We facilitate collaboratively on the materials. Maybe we personalize some of the materials that are already on the professional collateral that already exists on our website. We'll tailor to them. So just a number of all across the country, with either the geographic regions are located out of our SCPA, which is our public affairs and strategic communications office. They've coordinated with states to conduct sort of events with FSDs in the local area. We also conduct, as underneath our national advertising campaign, it includes a survey that we conduct every 2 months. And what the survey measures is sort of what is the level of Real ID awareness? What is the intention of people who want to travel in the next 12 months? And what we found out through the survey is that right now, of all the individuals that plan to travel in the next 12 months, 93% have either a Real ID or other acceptable ID. So the real challenge is for those individuals that don't have a Real ID to bring the other acceptable ID that we have. So potentially it could drop down to about 7% of the individuals presenting, have a non-compliant license that they'll present at the checkpoint. We also sent letters to the states, the governors of the lowest 11 compliance rate states, expressing our support for them and offering our encouragement to continue the good efforts that they have to increase the compliance rates within their states. And again, the Real ID creative assets. This link really should say TSA.gov/RealID/campaign toolkits. The website used to be on DHS, and it's going to be transitioned over to TSA. But yeah, you can still go here. It'll click over. The other types of industry and advertising that we've done is that travel industry associations have pushed a messaging. We've had corporations include the Real ID content in their travel portals and other communications. We've seen it in like booklets on airplanes, and TMC has included Real ID in the multiple channels. Illinois still got a Real ID Supercenter. Well, they've done things at Car Show. They also went to United Airlines in Chicago, both at the airport and at their headquarters, to enroll their employees in Real ID. United Airlines implemented a multi-wave communication strategy to their Mileage Plus loyalty program. And Uber is also involved in emailing literally millions of their customers about Real ID. Next slide. So there's a lot of DMVs are putting a lot of effort into making Real ID appointments available to accommodate individuals seeking to obtain one. All we see is that no matter what state you may be from, is go to your state to get your state specific. We have 56 different licensing jurisdictions. So if you've seen one state, you've seen one state. It's like to say, it's like airport. You've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. They're all different. They all have their requirements. There are minimum requirements as specified by the regulation. The states, how they implement that, may vary slightly from state to state. But, generally, you're going to need a proof of identity and date of birth, evidence of U.S. citizenship, lawful status, proof of Social Security number, proof of residency. Now, Social Security number, you don't need actual proof of it. You can just provide it. That is electronically verified through the Social Security Administration. So you don't need to bring your Social Security card or proof of your card. Just write it down. Now, travelers that are not Real ID ready should be prepared with other acceptable forms of identification or get to the airport a little early. Okay. Next slide. And this is a great little infograph. I'm sure that GBTA has seen this many times, but it's still a great little thing. This is on the page that we have for our professional collateral. It's just an infograph about Real ID. And it says, be ready by May 7th. After May 7th, we might have to changed it and said, are you Real ID ready? So next slide. I think that we have something from our secretary that Miss Dawn is going to start.
Hi, I'm Christine Ulm, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. If you plan on traveling, we need your help to prevent delays and to prove your identity. Get a Real ID. Starting May 7th, you will need a Real ID to travel by air or to visit federal buildings in the United States. These IDs keep our country safe because they help prevent fraud and they enhance security. Please do your part to protect our country. Go today and don't delay. To learn more, go to dhs.gov/real-id. Thank you. Hi, I'm Chris.
Thank you.
And I'd like to remind everybody that if you have any questions that we don't get to during this webinar, David Lim is your guy, followed by Simone Davis, not George Peterson. I'm filling.
Okay.
Oh, you can ask.
We're going to ask George the questions now, and of course, if there are any other questions that need followed up, David and Simone are fantastic resources as well. So the first question is, what happens if someone tries to go through TSA without a proper ID? What if they just have a regular non-ID compliant, not a regular non-compliant ID?
So yeah, the term is non-compliant. And non-compliant, so Real ID only applies to state-issued driver's licenses and ID cards. So let me just say, you should never answer questions like, is my passport Real ID compliant? Because I'll say no. And they go like, oh, it's not good. I said, no, it is good. It's an alternate form. It's another acceptable form of ID. So Real ID only applies to driver's licenses and ID cards that are issued by state licensing agencies. So Real ID doesn't apply to anything else. So a passport is not Real ID compliant. A tribal ID is not Real ID compliant, but they are acceptable IDs. So just to make sure that we're all on using the same jargon. So you have a list of acceptable IDs at TSA. If you go to a federal agency, they'll have their own list of acceptable IDs because those are set by the agency. So for TSA, when it comes to state-issued driver's license and ID cards, when card-based enforcement starts on Wednesday, if they have a state-issued driver's license or ID card, it should be Real ID compliant. If someone comes with a non-compliant card, then what they'll be given is a notification that, hey, your card's not in compliant. You're not in compliant with Real ID. This is what you have to do to get in compliance with Real ID. Here's a barcode so you can figure out how to get Real ID compliance, and then please do so. Okay. They may be subject to some additional screening. But our focus at the beginning of this is to enforce Real ID, but minimize impact at the TSA checkpoint. We're going to maintain security and operational stability. It's not good if it gets backed up there anyway. But the message is that everybody needs to know we're enforcing Real ID, and that Real ID it's an increased form of identity security. So we're doing it to protect Americans. The whole intention of Real ID is to protect citizens and our infrastructure. And the higher level identity verification has additional, security benefits beyond just the official use cases. So, it's not an act by the federal government to track people, to control people, to overstep, federal sovereignties for issuing identifications. It is intended to help protect our citizens and our infrastructure from terrorist or other attack by increasing the level of ID assurance, by implementing simple security standards that will help protect the integrity of the ID itself, so that when it's presented to somebody, you have a much higher level of identity assurance that the individual presenting the credential is the person that they say who they are. And of course, that's very important when you fly airplanes. It's kind of long-winded answer, I hope, but I hope it's educational.
So essentially, if you are traveling and you do not have a real ID driver's license, but you have other acceptable forms of identification, and where can you find the best list for those other acceptable forms of identification?
It was on the slide deck, but you go to TSA and look for screening, and it'll give you the entire list of acceptable IDs.
Fantastic. And I think I've heard one should never print out that document because it's subject to change.
Yes, it is subject to change. So you want to check it frequently. And the reason is because we're moving to a higher level of identity assurance, and it makes sense that other documents on there that aren't as assured as real ID could eventually come off. But to do that, it requires a lot of stakeholder coordination. I mean, just as we are coordinating with our stakeholders for real ID, there may be other IDs on there whose holders go like, wait, well, what do we do? And give them an opportunity to maybe update their document, or manage a transition plan or something like that. But the key information that needs to be seen at the TSA checkpoint is a photo of the individual to, is this the person that's presenting themselves, and the key biographic data that's on the manifest, which is your name, your sex, your date of birth.
Okay, so it's certainly been in the news a bit about the long lines of TSA, or the long lines at the DMVs to get real IDs. And I think there's some concern that if people haven't yet gotten their new real ID driver's license, that they should cancel their trip because they think they won't be able to board the plane. What would you say to that concern?
I would say come to the airport early, but don't cancel your trip. TSA's mission is the freedom of movement of people and commerce. Okay, we are implementing real ID. We're some growing pains, but I don't think that a draconian approach is necessarily the best approach. There's just a lot of myths about real ID out there, which has garnered a lot of resistance, a lot of distrust, a distrust of the federal government, a sense that this is a tracking, a sense that this is, some large database to track our citizens. And the states themselves had that same thing, which led to like 22 states initially, putting legislation against real ID, outlawing real ID in their own state. So some states got off to a late start. New Jersey, for instance, is tried to implement real ID in 2011 or 2012. They were sued by, sort of an advocacy organization. And when the advocacy organization won, they said, look, we're going to join the rest of the states and, against this federal oversight, and, overreach of protections, safety and privacy. New Jersey didn't get certified until 2020, which is the start of the COVID pandemic. And 3 years they had difficulty challenges getting DMV access. So, TSA is aware of the challenges that states have had. We're aware of, overcoming, the slow adoption of real ID. So it's important to begin enforcement. You have to send the signal that we're going to follow the law. Congress has passed the Real ID Act in 2005, but they reiterated their support of the safety benefits of Real ID when they passed the Real ID Modernization Act in 2020. So we have two acts of Congress that said we believe in Real ID, we believe in the security benefits for our country, and we're So we're simply saying it's time to implement, because if we don't implement, people will never feel that Real ID will get implemented and will never accomplish the security benefits that they can provide. So we just have to start. I hope that helps.
It does. And as we're starting this process, and that there are, potentially some additional screening that people without the acceptable forms of IDs will have to go through. Is there a time frame for when that practice might end, where eventually, TSA officers say, no, I'm sorry, you do not have a real ID or an acceptable form of ID, and you can't board?
So right now, we're planning accordingly to ensure no impact on wait times or TSA screening operations. Okay. And we're collecting data at the checkpoint, and we would like to see the numbers go down. If the numbers remain stubbornly up, then I'm not going to speak to that, but you could begin to see like, well, we're not seeing the reaction we'd like to see. But what we are seeing is we're seeing a big uptick in people in state appointments. So we're in contact with the states. We know that states that have online appointments, they're booked to the limit of their online appointments. Illinois set up a super center specifically dedicated to Real ID. To walk in, they can walk in anytime in downtown Chicago. Other states have set up, they've gotten funding from their legislation for increased public advertising campaign, for NTEs, which are sort of individuals that they hire for a short time period, and they're dedicated to working only Real ID cases. So we see, efforts from all the states to, give the resources, get behind it, because the demand really wasn't there before. And the demand is really being driven by the fact that we're beginning enforcement. So it's a good thing. So while people go get their Real IDs, we would expect to see, the numbers at the checkpoint and its compliance rise. And as long as they're rising, I think that's a good thing for everybody. But yeah, right now, our focus is ensuring that people understand they need to get a Real ID. So we're going to give them a notice. We want everybody to know that enforcement is real. We are enforcing it consistent with the law. We are trying to move to a higher level, and we will move to a higher level of identity assurance. But we also understand that there are real people out there trying to get a Real ID that may not have it at the time of their trip. And so it's a balance, right? So we're going to balance, and we're going to ensure that you get notified. We're going to make sure that you get through the checkpoint. And then we're going to also keep tabs on things. So I guess the best answer is let's check later.
Okay. And we'll be sure to let people know when it looks like it's getting there. So there are a bunch of questions here. There have been I read a confusing media article this morning, and it deals with...
That never happens.
Never happens at all. Never happens at all. And it deals with the 8 states that have enhanced driver's license. Now, I think there's word going around in Michigan that Michigan will not begin enforcing the Real ID, but I believe that's out of the state's responsibilities because they're commercial airports, correct?
So what do you mean by Michigan? I don't understand what that means. Like, how's the state doing anything about enforcement when enforcement is only conducted at federal? It's a federal thing.
Yeah, so I think that's right.
I'm not sure how. I'm not familiar with the article, but I haven't heard. We're enforcing it all over 440 airports. Federal agencies are beginning to enforce it, except the few that have determined that they're going to use a phased approach. We do have some federal agencies that have leveraged our rule. We published a rule that authorizes federal agencies, authority to implement a phased approach when it comes to Real ID after an assessment, after they've done a study of the impact of Real ID enforcement on security, on the operational impact, and the impact on the public for the services that they would provide. And we have a few federal agencies that are doing that. So, they'll be published on our website, and then on their website, on the website of the agency that is doing it, they'll give the details about the federal approach. And most of them are doing a similar thing where they're going to give a notification of noncompliance. They'll otherwise accept the noncompliant card as a means of identification for access to the area. And then at a certain point, they're just going to cut it off. So their phased approach is more like a notification, and then we cut it, and then it's going to be a hard enforce. But what it does is it does give the opportunity for states that have low compliance rates for those citizens to get their real IDs, and still be able to handle their business either through TSA, go on their flights, or do the business that's necessary at the federal agency that to do it. And then when we did a review, we've been working with all the federal agencies for over 2 years to prepare for this. We developed specific guidance. It was published by the ISC on their website and includes a flow chart to say what is the applicability of Real ID. So we are prepared. I think that we're prepared, and we prepared the entire federal government to implement Real ID. And if we don't begin enforcement of Real ID, we'll never have Real ID. So it's very, very critical to start enforcement and to sort of pull everybody along. And as they come up with these concerns, address the concerns, get the information that's out there so that, it's transparent. We want to be transparent. We want to be, full disclosure, because, we want to make sure that these myths about Real ID, get eliminated.
I think there are also a lot of questions about, now Real ID is only applicable to 18 and older, correct?
So on TSA's identification policy is 18 years and older. I can't talk for other federal agencies, but it's 18 and older.
Okay, so there are really no additional steps people need to take if they're traveling with young children.
No, it's the same as before.
Okay. Okay. Now there were some questions about if a traveler doesn't have a acceptable form, they're given the warning. I think that's, and the concern is how many times would they be given that warning that they need a Real ID? And I think the answer earlier was at some point in time, that person, will likely not be able to travel.
I think that may not be the best way of looking at it. When we give you a notification, we're not writing your name down. Okay, we're not tracking you. If you come back the very next day, you're likely get a notification again. It's based more on like the time period that we've been in, how long we've been in this. Where do we start, introducing friction, right? There's already friction. You're gonna get slowed down. You're gonna get, you're gonna be having a notice. You may get an additional screening, depending upon, the operational at the time. You're still going to get more friction than if you had a Real ID, and you may get additional friction as the further on past enforcement that we go. But I think that if the states and citizens are, continuing to go to the DMVs, and the DMVs continue to have then, I think the TSA is going to stick to its mission, and we're going to get to the point where Real ID is fully enforced. And if you don't have a Real ID, then, it's as if you don't have an acceptable ID. You have to go through an alternate ID process, and when that is, or I'm not going to I really can't say. But yeah, it's a balance, right?
Okay.
It's a balance where you're going to get friction whether you like it or not, because you don't have an acceptable ID. And we have been trying to tell people for years that it's May 7th, it's May 7th, it's May 7th. And we started a year in advance to give people notification at the TSA checkpoint that we're enforcing.
So there are uh I've seen this in a couple of different ways. A traveler is heading out and they have a real ID driver's license. However, when they're returned to their home, it's expired, so therefore they no longer have an acceptable form of ID.
No,
Um,
that's not true.
okay,
Shame. We accept IDs up to 2 years expired.
okay,
Okay.
okay,
You have a real ID. It's expired. It's a real ID that's acceptable at the TSA checkpoint. You may not be able to drive on it. That's between you and the police officer that pulled you over. But at TSA, if you have a valid credential and expired no more than 2 years, that is an acceptable ID. That
okay.
applies to passports too, tribal cards, anything else. So
Yeah. All right. There are some questions about what sort of additional screening travelers might face.
yeah, so what I'm saying is that we're planning accordingly to ensure minimal impact on wait times and on TSA screening operations. Okay.
Mhm.
Could you face? Yes. Yes, you could. I'm not going to deny that, because technically you don't have an acceptable ID, and the passenger travelers are subjecting themselves to that risk. But we also understand there may be a significant volume of passengers, and we have a mission. We have a security mission, but we also have, and it's bad for a security mission if there are significant backups at the TSA checkpoint. And if people miss flights, and it's just it's a balance. It's a
Yeah.
real balance. So what we'd like to see is the support of the country and adoption of real ID soonest.
When you were speaking earlier, you said when you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. And
Yeah.
so as TSA looks to mitigate the wait times and the lines, you know, it, how much discretion are the local airports given on how to do that? Like, for example, will if the space is available, will lines be set up for those with compliant license IDs and those with non-compliant IDs, or is it just
So
all, yeah,
so so the so the an FSD is a federal security director, and they're responsible for all the airports under their authority. They have a significant amount of experience in their airports with their region. They're the ones that have the relationships, and they are the ones that are best qualified to develop the specific plans for enforcement. They're given the guidance, but they're responsible for the actual planning, the execution, and things like that. So I can't really tell you, like George Peterson is not going to tell you like what's going to happen at any one airport. I will just say that the FSDs, um, they're highly qualified. They're very smart. They're highly qualified, and they work very well with the airports, airlines. It's a whole team effort when you get to an airport. So um, I would just have to say, in FSDs we trust.
good. Now, Another question, and this deals with clear. If your ID is not real ID, does that nullify your clear benefit?
I will have to get back with you on the registered traveler aspect of clear.
Okay.
I mean, I do know that clear passengers are subject to the same requirements as any other passenger when it comes to real ID.
Yes.
So if they don't have a real ID, they're going to be given a notification, and subject it's just like any other passenger. As far as like how their registered traveler work, I think that they still get whatever the normal thing is that, except if it's not a real ID, they're going to be treated at the TDC the same as anyone else that comes up to the TDC that does not have a real ID.
Okay. There are some questions around visas, people or green card holders traveling through domestic airports.
What are the questions?
Well, whether their green card is an acceptable an acceptable form of ID if they do not have a real ID driver's license.
You have to go to the list of acceptable IDs. I don't see green card, but there's some document on there that has a funny number. I don't know if that's a green card. I'm sorry, I'm not
Okay.
an expert on the green card. But if it's on the TSA's list of acceptable IDs, then it is acceptable. But there's some on their IDs that have like these form numbers. Maybe that's the green card. I don't know. Like the naturalization card, that green thing. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I would have to look it up. That's a question I will get back with you.
Okay. Okay. The there I know you went through it in the presentation over what documents you need when you're going to apply for a real ID driver's license. I did have a question around your comment about the Social Security number and that you don't need a card to prove that. Could you explain that a little more?
Yes. So the Real ID Modernization Act of 2020 sort of updated things to the better operating environment. We eliminated the requirement to produce a Social Security card for the application because we have an automatic verification system set up with the Social Security Administration. All you have to do is put it down your Social Security number. That's it. Now, that doesn't prohibit a state from saying, no, we want to see a Social Security card. If they want to do it, something that's more stringent, they can. And I know of at least one state that does. There may be others that I don't know of, but that's why you have to check specifically with your state. But the law authorized us, and we implement it in regulations that an SSN is not an SSN card, or any document that says this is my SSN is not necessary. You can simply just give them your SSN number.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm not quite sure I understand this line of questioning, though I've seen it come up some. And it deals with what other proof of name can be used for someone with a surname change from a birth certificate, as in someone getting married.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges. So Real ID requires documentation of name changes. So if you have if you present a birth certificate, but you want your name on your Real ID to be something other than on your birth certificate, you need to change it. You need to show the documentation that demonstrates you do have a different name. So yes, that is a big challenge for many women that have gotten married. They present their marriage certificate, and the state says, well, okay, we saw that you got married, but it doesn't document your name change. We need that document. And there's been some challenges with women trying to get that information. So this is like one of the things that, maybe, we're trying to address, but we can't address yet except through regulations, and regulations are very, very challenging right now. I'm sorry. Making a regulatory change is extremely challenging right now. A lot of the regulatory activity has been shut off. But it's a challenge, and I feel sort of sorry for all the women that have to go through that. We are working with California on something that's kind of cool. If we're establishing what they call a CRADA, Cooperative Research and Development, to test a system in which, if we can electronically validate the name change through the California court system, then they can just do it online and not come in. So we're hoping to implement other types of, that and other types of things that would make it easier on people while maintaining the security of Real ID. So,
Okay.
yeah, it is a requirement, but the identity assurance is sort of driven also from the NIST standards, 863-3, and it's standards driven. It's not something that we made up and said, oh, this is what we have to absolutely do. It's something to maintain a standard for that, a certain level of identity assurance, so that people, when they present it themselves, we have a high level of assurance that they are who they say they are.
We're running out of time here on questions. We're scheduled to go 45 minutes. I think a lot of the webinar attendees have responsibility to a lot of corporate travelers, and they're trying to understand what message they should tell those travelers to be prepared for on May 7th and post afterwards. I think number one, to me, it's if you don't have a Real ID driver's license that has the star, you check the other forms of acceptable forms of identification. A passport is an acceptable form, enhanced driver's license are acceptable forms, and then there's a number of other forms that people should look for to check.
And if your passport is expired, as long as it's not expired more than 2 years, that is still an acceptable form. Don't think that because your passport is expired, you can't use it.
Okay. And for those that just don't have any of that information, what, as you said, TSA is not checking off people when they fly that they didn't have they didn't have a Real ID the first time they flew. So there's no record of them going back and forth between that. But what should they be thinking of when they go to the airport without an acceptable ID?
If you go to the airport without an acceptable ID, get there please get there early so that you can get through. We're really trying to make sure that, we're screening people and getting them processed as quickly as efficiently as possible. And we will prioritize, people that have, to the extent that, like the airport layout or everything will show. We don't want to, penalize people that do have the right ID, because we're trying to get through people that don't have the right ID. But at the same time, we're trying to get people through the TSA checkpoint. We're trying to we will be maintaining our levels of security. And we do, so don't cancel your trip, plan on traveling, get there early if you need to, probably get there early if you have the right ID, because you should not be sure of what the impact is at your particular airport. Some airports have much higher non-compliance rates than others, that, they may be more operationally challenged. The state of Texas has nearly 100%, Real ID. They may not be as challenged as other airports. And New Jersey has a much lower rate, but they also have a much higher rate of passport saturation. So they have a, you may see a lot more passports. So my first message is, if you don't have a real ID, is to get a real ID. Encourage your customers to get a real ID, and get to the airport early.
Now, and we're gonna wrap it up. I know this come up a few times. Again, it's back on the name change. It's back on the real ID, the name on the driver's license or the passport, matching exactly what's on the airline ticket.
Yeah, that has to be. I say there's no wiggle room on that. Yeah, your name, date of birth, and sex has to exactly match. Now, one letter off, you know, if somebody spells William and they leave out an L by accident or something like that, there are policies to address, you know, some name change mismatches. But if your ticket says Bill and your ID says William, I mean, that's not going to work. So make sure that, and it says when most airlines say this, you know, make sure that whatever you enter here matches your identification that you presented at the TSA checkpoint.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so just so everybody is aware, the slides and recording will be made available to all the registrants, and we greatly appreciate George Peterson's time today in meeting with us and talking about these issues. It feels confusing, but I think in the end, you know, the operations and the TSA team, you know, will do their best to minimize the impact so that we can continue to travel for business. So thank you very much.
What is confusing?
Get
Get a real ID. Get to the airport early if you don't have a real ID, but get a real ID. Tell everybody to get a real ID. But in the interim, while you're getting it, still go to the airport. Just get there.
That's right. Perfectly said.
What's confusing?
I think there are so many things out there that get people confused, and so you taking time today to simplify it. Let's go.
Yeah, let's keep it simple. Just tell everybody to get a real ID, and tell everybody that the real ID is not a bad thing. Okay, it is a hassle for some people, especially for there are cases in which people have been married for a long time. They really want to comply. You know, yeah, there's always going to be some challenges that we have. We do wish that we could address those, but some of these things have to be addressed by regulation. So we'll get to those. But in general, yeah, we would just appreciate that people understand there are big security benefits with Real ID that go well beyond just getting through the TSA checkpoint. You know, it's serving as the basis for a high-level identity assurance, which could be utilized in other areas too to help identity fraud, identity theft, help protect our citizens. So yeah, it is a good thing, believe it or not, and we're not tracking anybody. So thank you very much. I appreciate your patience and having me, and you know, the much prettier Simone will be here again.
Thank you very much. And thank you guys for joining us.
All right. And send any of the questions to me, Shane. We'll get you responses right away. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great one, everybody.